Good evening, everyone. It's so good to see you. For those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet, my name's Jay Therrell. I'm the president of the Florida Conference, and we are really privileged tonight. We get to have uh, someone share with us who really is kind of the authority here for Global Methodist Finances because he is the treasurer and the chief financial officer for the Global Methodist Church for the entire denomination. I'm talking about my friend, Jeff Pospisil. Jeff is not only the CFO and treasurer for the GMC, but he is a CPA. He has been a professor of accounting. He, before all that, was treasurer of Dakota's annual conference of the United Methodist Church for a long time. So he brings a lot of experience and is able to give good guidance to churches on best practices for how to be a good finance team. I think he's going to probably help with um, helping you understand uh, what you should do when throughout the year. And of course, you're going to be able to ask questions as well. And so you can, if you want to use the chat feature, you can do that. I'll kind of keep it monitored. And Jeff has said he'd like to deal with questions kind of as we go along, as he's at a particular topic. If something pops up, he'd like to just deal with it as it comes along. So we'll do that. I'm going to pray for us, and then I'm going to turn things over to Jeff. All right. So let's pray together. Gracious Heavenly Father, we're just grateful that you have brought us together tonight. Lord, we want to be good stewards of the funds that you have entrusted to us. And so we ask that for these next few moments together, that you would teach us through Jeff. Lord, we want, when we're finished with all of this, to be better at the work that you've called us to do. Holy Spirit, please be the unseen guest on this video call. And we ask all this in the name of your Son and our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. So I'm going to turn things over to Jeff. Jeff, welcome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jay. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to participate in this. I just think anything you can invest towards your leadership, especially in the area of finance, is so valuable. I used to tell my accounting students this. I used to ask them, who do you think is in charge of most churches? And they would say, well, maybe the senior pastor, maybe the board. And I would say, usually it's the person that understands the money. And that is true. So it might be the treasurer in a lot of cases because they understand what bills need to be paid and what the financial position is of the church. But it's also our job, especially as finance people, to help our leaders, our pastors, understand the finances so that way they can live into that leadership role too. So my hope is that I don't know your churches as well as you do. That's why you are there. That we'll hopefully learn some good stuff together, and you'll be able to adapt maybe one or two things that'll benefit your church this year. So at the end of this I'm going to show you a number of resources too, and if something is shown here, to be able to contact Jay, and we'll have a mailing list, and we'll be able to email everybody out those lists of any resources. So if there's something out there. So, all right. By the way, I'm in Mitchell, South Dakota, and it was a balmy 40 degrees today. It felt awesome. So the snow is halfway gone. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So hopefully everybody can see my screen all right. You should see it says Seasons of the Finance Committee. And in the Dakotas, we have 4 seasons, but I like to think of it this way, as in Seasons of the Finance Committee, because that way you don't get overwhelmed. There is a time for everything. A lot of times there's so many things you could be doing at your church, but what is the best thing we could do in each season? And so to break it down by quarter, so that way we could make progress. We could keep investing our efforts into something that'll make our churches better. But we don't get overwhelmed by all those things that we could be or could be doing. All right. So this is a Dakota's forest. If you've never seen one, we grow them in straight lines. Actually, those are our windrows. You'll see these all over the place. If you've ever visited up here in North Dakota, South Dakota, back 90 years ago during the Dust Bowl, that was the big program, is to plant these shelter belts and plant these tree rows. And what it makes me think of is it makes me think of this quote by Warren Buffett. Someone sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. The person sitting in the shade now should be grateful for the person who planted and tended that tree. Or in the case of the Dakotas, somebody should be grateful for the windbreak because of somebody planted a tree. So what we're really doing here is we are thinking about the future of our church. So we're thinking about, and that might be us a year from now. It might be the next generation when they take it over. But whatever we're doing now, we're hoping to set up the future for more success. One of the things that I've often thought about is a lot of times we know the good things to do, but then we fail to do them. And I remember making commitments all the time. You know, I made a commitment to do this workshop, but sometimes it's so easy to commit ourselves to doing something in the future. And I kind of joke to myself. I say, when people say, "Are you sure you can do that?" And I would say, "That's future Jeff's problem." You know, but for us, at least let's think about what we can do today to set up ourselves for a better future, as well as the next generation that's going to be blessed by our church. So keep that lens in your mind as we go through this. So the first season, audit season, and this is my own quote. Starting your year with an audit is a great way to make sure your year can't get any worse than it started. So most of us, we're required by discipline to have an audit. What does that mean? We're going to go over that. But the gist of an audit, and in the Global Methodist denomination, we're just asking for at least an internal audit. So an internal review by an audit committee, similar to what was required under the United Methodist denomination. And I'm going to go over exactly what that means. But first, I want to just set the context of it is, uh, I like this quote by Ronald Reagan. It's trust but verify. That's really what we're talking about with an audit. Here's what we say how things are supposed to happen financially, and then we have to verify it. So we have to know how things are supposed to happen, and then we have to actually look and make sure they are happening that way. So that's really the idea behind the whole audit. There are phases to a church audit. And I used to do church audits just on the side when churches would invite me here. And it's really not as complicated as it sounds. So the first one is the planning phase. What does the planning phase mean? It means we have to pick a date. We have to say who's going to be involved, and that's basically it. Pick a date, maybe pick a snack or something like that. But and then the other thing is, what do we need to bring? So picking a date, that's the easy part, but who needs to be involved? One of the things, if you're not going to have another group from outside the church come and do your audit, I like it if the finance committee is involved. One of the things I think about is this is almost like the employee evaluation for the bookkeeper or the treasurer. It's a way of saying, okay, this is what we've heard how things are supposed to go this whole time. And we've been working with you and we have an idea of how it's supposed to work. And now we're going to actually see for ourselves. And it's a good way also. So that part needs to be there is maybe the finance committee or maybe somebody else. They don't have to have auditing experience. That's the one thing I want to say. They don't have to have auditing experience, but they do need to be willing to look at financial information. They need to be willing to actually try to discern how things are supposed to happen. The next process, and this is a different color. So the day of the audit, what we end up doing is we do interviews. And all we're going to do is we're going to ask them basically two different questions. How is money supposed to get into the church? How is money supposed to get out of the church? So how is money supposed to get into the church? How is money supposed to get out of the church? I'm going to show you really quickly, by the way. I have a audit guide. And I tried to simplify it. Actually, it's just an audit checklist. But it's to help you ask some of these questions. So is that showing up all right, Jay, on their screen, the checklist? Good.
It is.
So, but all it does is ask who has access to the blank checks? Who has access to the accounting system? What kind of accounting system are you using? Do you pay bills electronically? Those kinds of things. So we're just trying to figure it out. And then they ask on the deposit side too. And I have an Excel version of this so people can update it as they want as the time goes on. Then we go to the actual meat and potatoes of the audit, which is the verifying. Interviewing is important, but verifying, then all of a sudden they said, okay, this is how things are supposed to be paid. So let's just say, for example, we say that, oh, they got to fill out an expense voucher, and then this person has to sign off on it, and then this person signs the checks. So all we would do is we would say, okay, let's check 2 months worth of expenses. Let's look at a couple of bank statements, to see, a lot of times they have the image of the check there. So we'd be able to see the signatures there. Maybe they would say, we always have a team of 3 people that count the money. So, okay, let's look at 2 months worth of, counter sheets. I call them counter sheets, but are deposits. Let's look at 2 months worth of deposits. Can you show me that 3 people are always counting the money? So that's what we're really looking forward to. Whatever they said, or sometimes there's just questions that come up. I've had, when I participate in a church audit, and a lot of times if there's good trust involved, what they'll do is they'll say, I know we should be doing something different here. Can you look at it with me? And that's so helpful. Like if I don't understand if I'm doing the payroll right or the pension right, or if I don't understand why my assets look weird. I've been in some church audits where they just didn't even know what the balance sheet was supposed to do, and they only had one number, and it was just the cash that was the right number on the balance sheet. And it was nice to just be able to work through it. Okay, let's look at your liabilities and see. You say you have a debt of $100,000 and it hasn't changed in the last 3 years. What is the debt actually? And let's go ahead and try to fix that. So once you get that trust up there, then you could actually work through them as you're digging through these things. In that audit checklist, there are the same things that I've mentioned really quickly. Is there are reviewing the documentation. So looking at the bank statement, what are you looking for? Looking at the financial reports. Is there anything weird in the financial reports that maybe we need to dig in further? Checking how the financial reports relate to the budget. Checking through the minutes to make sure we followed through on items that we said we'd follow through on. Are there adequate receipts? So if we're writing a check and we look at a sample and all we see is that there's a check stub there, but we don't see any receipt, we don't see any voucher, we just don't, and maybe it's a check to, well, whatever, a check to anything, and there's no support. Why is that? So anyway, it's just asking those questions and trying to be able to say, okay, this is how we said we were going to do it. We were going to have people sign off, we were going to have proper receipts, and this is how checks are going to be signed. Are they happening that way? And then the last one, and this is by far the hardest one. Again, this is a little bit different color because it's the documenting of it all. So this is more than just, if you remember the United Methodist Fund Balance Report, this is more than just the Fund Balance Report. Although the Fund Balance Report was fine, actually the bottom part of that report where they asked you for any recommendations, that was actually the gold of this. That's what we really want to see is where can we improve next year? Or where can we improve this year, I guess was what it would be. So being able to document that, being able to write it out, being able to give a report then to either the full finance committee or to your board. And I often say, I would like to hear at the church, just to let you know, we did our annual audit, everything turned out well, and whoever is doing a great job, Jeff is doing a great job, something like that. I just think that provides assurance to all your donors, all your members that things are going well, and it just builds that trust. So but it starts with that documentation and actually writing it down. This is what we did. And then this is what we found. And even in my guide, I try to build that in there in the very bottom. So who was on the audit committee? Oh, did I build that in there? I think I have it actually on the bottom of each section as I build a little um, concerns or follow-ups or areas for improvement. I tried to put that on each page. So, all right. Are there any questions on the general process? Otherwise, what I want to do is I want to cover a couple of things that I think are important that is affecting a lot of our churches around payroll and W-2s.
Nothing in the chat so far, Jeff, so I think we're good.
All right. So this is going to be one of the biggest areas of concern for myself personally, as well as anybody else. We just did our W-2s for the Global Methodist Church, and sure enough, one of them got messed up. Why did that happen? Because there's a lot of things that are new. I mean, that's why it's so important this year. A lot of times you set up your payroll, you set up your benefits, and you set it and you forget it. But this year, there's so much change. Every single church that's in Global Methodist, you can't look at last year. So you just can't look at last year's W-2 and ensure that it's 100% correct, especially if your pastor is on benefits. So that's why it's so important. And a lot of times, I should say, why is it so important? A lot of times we set it up and then we just trust that it's correct from then on out. So I've had churches that'll do it incorrect forever and ever just because of the setup. So this is the year that if we're going to help our person that's doing payroll do it correctly. And we had an outside payroll service do it. So, I mean, we had professionals in this area do it, but we had to dive in, and it was actually one of our clergy people noticed that their W-2 was incorrect. So it happens even with the best of people. And then why is it so complicated? Many of you, if you've been in the church world a long time, you know it's so complicated because the government doesn't know what to do with pastors. So they think the IRS has declared that pastors are employees of the church. The Social Security Administration says, nope, they are self-employed, and they've never been able to work that out. So that's why your pastor gets a W-2, yet you're not able to withhold anything for Social Security and Medicare. So just one of those weird things. And that's what's complicated a lot of this. The other thing that's complicated, again, is if your pastor is on benefits, we're still trying to figure out how to best serve our churches in this area too. I've tried to put out some guides. I've tried to put out some things to help figure things out. And I'm going to show you the math real quick. And then I'll also show you a spreadsheet that I have that might help. So what is the math? So if I was going to, when I look at somebody's W-2, this is what I look at. First of all, I want to look at box one. I want to look at, the box one is their wages, their taxable income, and you're going to take their salary. If there's any kind of bonus that's paid through the church. So if you, let's just say you took an offering and you gave it and you paid it to the pastor through the church, or maybe you did Christmas bonuses or anything like that, you would include that in there too. Any unaccountable reimbursement. So what's an unaccountable reimbursement? So I have some churches that'll pay just a set amount for mileage. So maybe the budget for mileage is $1,200. So they'll just add an extra $100 to every paycheck. So anything that's unaccountable for, but they don't have to turn in any mileage. So they don't have to turn in any receipts. So if it's unaccountable, that's taxable as well. Then what I have to subtract off of there is if they are on our pension plan, any before tax contributions. And that's going to be most pastors. There's very few that use the Roth contribution. The Roth is actually post-tax or after tax. You would subtract off any part of the health insurance bill, that is the pastor's medical, dental, or vision premiums. So any of those are also subtracted off. And then any personal contributions from the pastor that are related to a health savings account or a flexible spending account. And then the last thing that you have to subtract off is the housing exclusion. And whether your pastor lives in a parsonage or maybe they're paid a cash housing allowance, they could still designate part of their salary for any extra housing expenses that are unreimbursed. So if they're in a parsonage and they're not reimbursed for, let's just say, light bulbs and pine sol and renter's insurance and who knows what, furniture, those kinds of things, they can go ahead and use that housing exclusion to then lower their taxable income. Or same way, if they have a cash housing allowance, and maybe their cash housing allowance doesn't cover everything. Maybe they wanted to replace the carpet or something like that, and it was a little extra expensive. They could have designated extra part of their salary as housing exclusion. So, all right. And then there's box two is the other one. Box two is tax withholding. That's completely voluntary. Churches can withhold taxes. They just cannot withhold Social Security or Medicare. So they can withhold for federal income tax purposes. And a pastor would just have to fill out a W-4 to have that done. And it's not a bad deal. If you already have other lay employees, at least one other lay employee, then it's no more extra work to do this. Box 10 is, I didn't mean to put wages there. This box 10 is actually dependent care contributions. So dependent care contributions. And box 12 shouldn't say wages either. Darn copy, copy and paste. Anyway, box 12 on your W-2, that is for those before tax pension contributions that we subtracted off. Those get a code E. And then if there was any Roth pension contributions, those get a code BB. And then the last one is any HSA contributions, and those get a code W. So, all right, that is the math of this. And let me show you real quickly though, I do have a calculator here, and this is going to be a little bit small. I apologize for that. But basically what I've asked, what it's intended to do is you could plug in your annual salary, any other compensation. So again, that would be like bonuses or unaccountable reimbursements mostly, if there's a parsonage or not, or in any designated housing exclusion. I'll throw something in here. And then what is the monthly bills for any of these ones? And I apologize, this is not the best spreadsheet yet. It will get better. We keep improving it as we go on, but there's instructions on how to work with your pastor to get these amounts. So if you knew what those amounts were. But then what it does is it spits out what your W-2 will look like right here. It spits out what your, at least the pastor's part of the 941 looks like, what the paycheck amount is, and then what the withholding each paycheck will be. And so that just sets you up then for when you have to pay that monthly invoice. So, all right. That is that part of this. Everybody loves a good audit.
And Jeff, just for everyone, because we have one person ask in the chat. So if Jeff is going to share these with us, and if you will email, I put Julie Bullerdick's email address in the chat. She's our senior administrative assistant to the cabinet. So if you'll email Julie, just like you did to get the link for this webinar, we will get all these materials directly to you.
Yeah. That sounds good. Yeah, like I say, I mean, all this stuff, I want to give you, we're going to go over a lot of things, and really the resources are probably the most valuable part of this. Maybe I'll say something smart too. All right, we will go ahead and go into policy season. Pale ink is better than the most retentive memory. Harvey McKay said that one. Pale ink is better than the most retentive memory. Why? I don't know how many times I used to be an auditor, actually an actual auditor, not just a church auditor, but an actual auditor. And I don't know how many times there was where we'd have the same recommendation year after year after year, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I forgot. Oh yeah, I forgot." Well, a policy is a way to write it down. It's a way to write it down. Here's how we think, how we know things should be, and that's why I do like policies. So policies are good for a couple of things. One is internal control, so making sure people don't walk away with money. The other thing is just to help us reinforce that we're putting out accurate information. So that's why you might have a policy that you have to have a bank reconciliation, which you should. You might have a policy that you have to have an audit, which we do, but all that is to make actually our financial information more accurate, more reliable. So it's not just internal controls, which is guarding against stealing, but sometimes it's about compliance and actually quality control. One of the things I want to talk over real quickly is who steals. And even in the church world, people steal. Who steals? Well, there are three types of people. The first person is the person that's just looking to steal. And a lot of times we can pick those people out. We don't normally hire them right away. But there are people that are just looking to steal. They're just that's what they're doing. There's another type of person, and by the way, my daughter really likes Tangled, so that's why you're getting this. So anyway, there's another type of person that'll never steal. They don't have that. That's just not contrary to their nature completely. It would take an extraordinary circumstance for them to steal. And then there's everybody else that would steal under the right circumstances. So, and my belief is, and what my experience shows, is that the people that are just looking to steal and the people that will never steal, that's a minority. A lot of the people, they're in that category that if they're pushed in the right circumstances and they have the right opportunity, they may steal, even from the church. And so we call that the fraud triangle. That if you have the opportunity, so if you know that you can get away with it, so if you know you can get away with it, you have some kind of pressure. So a lot of times I see this, it's like gambling. It might be medical bills. It might be some other vice, or it could be, yeah, it could be something as simple as medical bills. And you think, oh, I'm just gonna take a loan from the church. I work so hard, and then you start rationalizing it. After a while, I'm underpaid, and they would give me a loan anyway, and so I might as well just do it myself, and they'll never know about it, and then you end up getting behind. And people end up rationalizing things too. So, but the big one that we could look at is the opportunity. We can't do much about the rationalization. We can't do much about the pressure, but we can remove opportunities. And the one that I'm surprised that we have to go back to is when we're counting the offering. A lot of our churches, we kind of got lax around the COVID era, where I had people starting to count money by themselves again. And that used to be such a big no-no for a long time. And so this is just a reminder that if your church has just one person counting the offering, you need at least two people, not the same household, to count it. And I always document it. One of the things that I do have, and it's not the prettiest one, but it is a counter sheet. A lot of times we have different coin and currency, and maybe you still have envelopes, and maybe you still have Sunday school offering, but you can adjust it however you want. And then figure for the bulletin. I don't know if people still put the offering in the bulletin, but our church does. So, and then if there's any special offerings, and then the most important thing for me as an auditor or as a church is I want to know who did it. So I have a little place to sign off on it. So they fill it out, whether they fill this out on paper or on Excel, then they go ahead and they sign it, because that way I do know who actually did it. Without that signature, I'm just taking your word for it that two different people did it, or at least two different people did it. All right. But this is probably the small area where you would think with cash and everything else that this might be the place where people lose a lot of money, but it's not here. This is really not the big risk. The big risk comes at a church like this. So Tabor man pleads guilty in embezzling $324,000 from two parishes. So Tabor, South Dakota, you might say, how big is that? It's about 400 people. So you can get an idea. This is not a large church. This is a small church with maybe about 50 people in it on a Sunday, two churches like that. And you think to yourself, how in the world could they have stolen $324,000? I mean, how that doesn't even sound real. I mean, hopefully we would notice in our own churches if all of a sudden we were losing that much money. But the reason why it didn't happen is they didn't have good internal controls. And what this gentleman did, is he started paying his own bills with the church checkbook. Started paying his own bills with the church checkbook. And after a few years, that started adding up. And the church just thought, oh man, expenses are getting quite kind of wild. The utility bills are really going up, and probably cursing the president and everything else. But really, they could have been cursing their treasurer. But again, he had the perfect opportunity to walk away with $324,000. And do you think there's any opportunity this church is going to get it back? So one of the key things we could do is we need to pay attention to our segregation of duties. So segregation of duties, and really around the area of expenses is what we need to think about. So one is, so there's three areas that we need to look at. And if you can sign the check, if you have access to the checks, and if you maintain the accounting records, you could steal anything from the church. So if one person can sign the check, has access to the checks, and also maintains the accounting records, that person is doing a favor by not stealing from the church, because they have every single opportunity to do so. So this is one of those big things where at least if we could break out one of those things. So one of the things that I normally like to do is when we're looking at check signers, I like to have two check signers, or have somebody else that sign the check. You know, if it's somebody on the finance committee, we used to take turns as a finance committee, somebody else do it, and just not have the treasurer be able to sign the checks, you know. So that to me was a big thing. Access to the checks, sometimes that's kind of hard to limit the treasurer from also not doing the accounting records, because a lot of times you're printing it. But there's a way to do that, especially if you're in a larger church. You might have the church secretary lock it up, and then the treasurer has to go and get a certain number of checks before they can print it. But even that access to the checks, that's even getting to be a smaller thing now, because so much of the time we are paying things electronically. And how does that work with all this? I mean, that would be a concern if you're paying a lot of your bills electronically. And one of the things I like to say is one of the key controls is the bank rec. So the bank reconciliation. Not only does that ensure that your checking account is accurate, but whether or not somebody else does it, somebody should be looking at that. They should be looking not only at the bank reconciliation report, but the bank statement. And then they would be able to see everything that goes through there. If you look at the bank statement, you're going to be able to see a lot. And then if you tie that in with that bank rec report, you're going to see what's outstanding. You're going to see what went through. And that is a very important control. So sometimes we've had people that maybe they can do almost all those things, but then if we have at least somebody else looking through that bank rec, it provides a lot less opportunity, because then you'd have to actually manipulate maybe the bank statement if you want to get away with it, and that's a lot more work. So anyway, can't encourage you enough to try to break up those three duties to some degree, or at least have somebody else do the bank rec, or review the bank rec regularly.
Jeff, we have a church in the Florida Conference that has $700,000 at the moment that is unaccounted for. And so we have a very significant audit going on in that church to try to figure it out. But it looks like the segregation of duties was not good in that church.
And I mean, we're in a high trust environment, but like I said, so one of the cases I remember, it was a lady, it was medical bills, and I think, I can't remember if her husband had some kind of employment issues as well, but she would actually be reading and listening to sermons on stealing, you know. So she was convicted. She knew the right thing to do, but she was just in a place where you do it once and you're so embarrassed. I mean, that's how sin works. I mean, and then you conceal it, and then it just until you bring it out into the light, sin is just going to compound and grow and fester and all that kind of stuff. So that is too bad. But that is why this is so important. And it's most of the time when I talk to treasurers, we think maybe they'll be offended by this or anything like that, but they want their back watched. They don't want to be, they want to be above reproach. So I've had treasurers actually say, if you don't fix this, I'm going to quit. And that's a proper stance for a treasurer to take. If you don't find a second signer for these checks, I'm going to quit. I mean, something like that is a stand I would be willing to take, because if people, I mean, just even think if giving goes down, people might start assuming that, oh, I wonder what's happening with the treasurer, because I hear there's no controls. So the other area I'd like to look at for is for policies that I think is needed. A lot of times when I look at donor restrictions, a lot of times I'll see a church, they'll have a financial statement and there'll be a page or 2 pages of these funds that were donor restricted accounts. And so one of the things that I like for a policy, and it's a policy that I've tried to push for a long time and I'm still pushing it, is what do you do with the leftovers? So in my own personal life, when it comes to food, we put leftovers in these Tupperware things, and it's like hospice. We put them there to die. So that's the same kind of thing when there's leftover things. So like, let's say you raise money to replace the carpet. Do you really need the leftover $139 left in the carpet fund for next time? What do you do with that leftover? What if you send kids to on a mission trip and you have 78 cents left over? What do you do with it? Whatever it happens to be. All it does is it clutters up your balance sheet or whatever report you're doing to keep track of it. And so what I normally do is I push people and I push committees to say, what do we do if there's leftover money after this? And one of the policies I just had, and I pushed it through, is any leftover money from a project, unless designated otherwise, goes right to the general fund. So that means at the end of the year, that whatever, I think I said $139 in the carpet fund and 78 cents in the mission fund, that goes right to the general fund. And it just keeps my balance sheet clean and it frees up a little extra money. So, and a little extra, yeah, I don't know why, it just consumes our attention too when we see those lines on there. The other thing that I like, and it's a good policy, that I stole this out of Richard Hammer's Clergy and Tax Guide, Clergy and Church Tax Guide, I believe is what it is, but a benevolence fund policy. So a lot of times we'll raise money for, maybe it's a needy family. There's or maybe it's just a general fund. So what this says is that, do you have a general fund for benevolences? So whether it's a family in our church, or maybe it's a family in our community, or maybe it's just people that happens to stop by the church. But basically people can give to it. And what this policy says is that you're giving to the benevolence fund, and you can make a recommendation, but ultimately that decision is ours to make. So, and the reason why you do this is you're not allowed to claim a charitable contribution for donations for a specific individual. So it makes sure that these contributions are tax deductible. But also too, if the need changes, if you bring in more money than needed, then you can use it for a different purpose. Or that's probably the main part of it. It just gives control back to the church over what people are, when people give to this fund, how it's used properly. So, all right, any questions? Are we still good?
So far, no questions.
All right. It's either really good or really bad.
Good.
So stewardship season is the next season. So we did an audit season, we did policy season. Policy season makes sense because we're following the audit. Stewardship season, normally around the summertime, we're starting to think about, we normally have a little extra time and we could start thinking about stewardship. So there's a couple of things to think about. One is teaching stewardship to our congregation. And I'll just touch on that very briefly, but there's some practical things that we could do as leadership and as finance committees that we could do to improve our own stewardship as a church. So the quote I use is, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And I like Jesus said that, by the way, and I like the amplified version. For where your treasure is, there your heart, and they expand on that, your wishes, your desires, that on which your life centers will be also. And if I could even just, I wish I could highlight this right now, but will be, that is such a key word there. It's the promise. It's not a description. It's not saying, oh, you're giving you're already giving your treasure there. You give your treasure where you want your heart to be. So that's what it's saying. So when I started tithing to the church, It did something in my, well, even before I started tithing, when I started just giving, I remember just giving $1 a week. And all of a sudden that went to $20. And whatever it did, it moved my heart towards the church. And it was kind of a miracle in a way, because I am a chief accountant. So even me tithing was a miracle in some ways, but it really did tie my heart to the church and to the work of Jesus Christ through our church. So when we think of stewardship, why do some churches make it so hard for people to put their treasure where we want their heart to be, or where they want their heart to be? Why do we make it so hard? I was just on a church's website just the other day. It was a friend of mine's church, and they had electronic giving in a way. You had to download a form and print it out, and then you had to find Dave at Sunday morning service and hand the form to Dave. And that was the instructions. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to accidentally do that. So if you, let's just say Jay is preaching at your church, and all of a sudden you say, man, I'm going to tithe, but first I got to go online and I got to print out this form and I got to find Dave, and I'll do it by next week. That's future Jeff's problem all of a sudden. So that's one of those things. That versus um, when you think about Amazon, for example, I've been thinking about buying this set of dumbbells for close to 2 years. I've almost hit that buy now button a couple of times. It's that easy. I could accidentally buy these almost. But there's all these other places that make it so easy that, you know, could I do that? Why do our churches make it sometimes hard for people to actually give? So, and yeah, I don't know why I zoomed in this, but anyway, that's what I just think about. How can we make it easier for people to put their treasure where they want their heart to be? So I would think about that. I would ask people about it. I know some people get caught up by my church, for example, we did text giving, and I asked people, how many of you actually have did any text giving? Nobody. I've never met anybody that's given by text yet to a church, by the way. But they do sign up for electronic giving. They do like to manage it online. So, and we've seen that grow. People like to give by check. Some people like to give by stock. Some people like to do IRA contributions. But how do we help these people, however they are able to give, whatever way works for them best? How are we able to help them? So the other one, besides giving, we're going to talk about investing church funds. And I'm in a very conservative area of the world where, and maybe this is what all churches, but most of our churches, you either have money in your checking account or you have money in CDs. And that's the two places. CDs was the only investment. And for a long time, CDs were really, really a poor investment. Now they're not as bad. But in the long run, CDs are not designed to beat inflation. So no matter what, you're going to lose against inflation with the CD. So what I normally talk to churches about is you really need to think of your church cash and investments into three different buckets or three different pots: the microwave, the oven, or the crock pot. The microwave, the oven, or the crock pot. So the microwave, what is that? That is our cash flow. It's stuff that we're planning on spending in less than a year. So it's stuff, that cash that we need to have on hand. So we're not asking for really any return. We don't expect much. We expect a microwave meal. We don't expect much. So if we get 0.1%, that's awesome. But if we don't get anything, that's also fine as well. The oven, that's usually a little tastier meal. So we do expect a little bit more out of that. So that's our midterm investments. So 1 to 3 years. So that might be our reserves if we have operating reserves, or maybe the capital reserve fund, money that we've set aside for a little bit in the future, or maybe we have an upcoming project. So maybe we're planning on, I don't know, here we replace our boilers and our roofs and our parking lots. And those are the three big expenses that we have. And those take time, but when you see that horizon coming up, we might invest that in something like a CD or something that is more stable in our returns. We don't want a lot of fluctuation. And then we have our crock pot thing. So if anything comes out of the crock pot, you better bet that that's pretty tasty. So that's where we have stuff that is very long term, 4+ years, 5+ years. So our endowments, a lot of times I've worked with churches that they have an endowment. They don't ever want to spend the principal. So let's invest it for a long term. So invest it into something like a money market. By the way, we're starting to work with Guidestone, and Guidestone will allow people to invest money in a mutual fund. They have Guidestone mutual funds. So that's just something to think about if your church is new to investing. Guidestone would be one to research. But yeah, putting it also the ones for distant projects too. So like I have a church that they're going to replace their roof here this spring, and then they're going to start saving money for when they have to replace it again because they got wood shingles. So they know if they start putting aside, you know, I think they were putting aside about $500 a month, and they could just start investing it now. And then in 20 years or so, or 30 years, when they have to replace the roof again, they don't have to beg, they don't have to do a fundraiser for the roof. And that's actually what they did this time. They just kept putting money away a little at a time, watch it grow with the market, and they didn't have to do a fundraiser to raise, I think he said 72 or $79,000 to replace the shingles on the roof. So that's a lot better thing than having to go through the distraction of a fundraiser for something that we know is coming up. All right. And then the last part of this section I want to talk about is managing reserves. And what do I mean by reserves? A lot of us will have extra money that we built up over the years. Sometimes it was a bequest that helped us launch it, but a lot of times what I'll do is, again, I'm working with churches that have CDs, so they'll have CDs, and every now and then they'll have to cash one in to help fund stuff. But what I like to do is I like to set very clear targets and very clear reserves. So when I talk about an operating reserve, I'm talking about something that will help support our budget if need be. If things go south, it'll support our budget. A capital reserve, that'll help do major repairs, such as replacing a roof, such as replacing the carpet or something like that. But you have to have very clear targets. And so I use a rain barrel to help think about that, because you have an inflow to the rain barrel and then you also have the outflow to it. So the very first part of that rain barrel, you're going to see that bottom turns red, and that's what I call the floor. You have to define the floor. What is your target that you're aiming for, that you need at least this amount? So let's just think about that with an operating reserve. And I'm kind of a Dave Ramsey guy, so I say 3 to 6 months for an operating reserve or an emergency fund. And so if I was going to say that, I would say my floor is equal to 25% of the budget. So if I have an operating reserve, I would be looking at that. And if it's less than 25% there, I'm going to say, I need to think of ways to put money in that rain barrel. I'm going to need to put money in there. So I'm going to think about, okay, what's our plan? If there's any extra money at the end of the year, let's put it in there. Maybe the one church I talked about that's replacing their wooden shingles, they put 2% of every offering into that reserve. And they did that for a number of years because they wanted to get that rain barrel up. And then once they reached that floor, then they didn't have to do it anymore. But anytime you're in that red, you need to be thinking, okay, how are we gonna commit to growing that? I had another church that anytime they received undesignated memorials, they put that in that reserve. So you have to have that plan to get up to that floor. That next section then, that green section, is where you're in the comfortable place, but eventually that comes to a stop, and that's the ceiling. So there's a place where you need to get up to at least to this amount to be comfortable. And then there's a place where, yeah, if we have this amount, we don't need any more. And again, if this is an operating reserve and we say 3 to 6 months, that would be that 50% part. So if it's over 50% of our budget, do we need to keep building it? So we don't need to, in this green area, we don't need to make plans on putting any more in. We can let the market take care of it. We can especially if you're investing it, you can let it grow with the market. But then anything that's over that, this is another tough thing for churches. And yeah, it is a tough thing for churches, but that blue part, anything that's above that, that's stuff that we should be skimming off. God has given us so much that our reserve is overflowing, likely there is an opportunity that we need to open our eyes to. So I did this basic thing with the Dakota's United Methodist Board of Pension. And I'm going to tell you, we started off with about $2 million in our reserve, our pension reserve. By the end, and that would have been in 2011. And by 2021, 2022, I think there was 1 year in there where that extra was so significant that we were sending $40,000 to every church served by a full-time pastor. So $40,000, that's enough to almost cover a salary for, well, probably is enough to cover salaries for quite a bit. So, but that was the thing that we could end up doing because we had a plan and we knew how much was too much. We knew how much was not enough. And then we could just trust that plan going forward. And it just opened our eyes. I mean, it was a blessing to our churches then to actually they received checks back every year for, I think, 7 or 8 years. So it was something. As soon as but otherwise, if you don't set that ceiling, you don't set that floor, you're going to have a tendency to always be scared and hoard, or you're going to have a tendency to spend too freely and deplete your rain barrel. So, I mean, that's why I think this is such a powerful concept. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one unless there's questions.
I think we're good.
Because oh, good.
No, I think we're good.
All right. The next one is the budget season. A budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. Like I said, I like Dave Ramsey. That's such a nice thing. But a budget is really a plan. And that same pastor that I was talking about with replacing the roof. The other thing he said is a budget tells you who you want to be in 1 year. A budget tells you who you want to be in 1 year, because it tells you what you're going to be doing, and hopefully it's guiding your plan, but it's also saying, okay, how much do I want to build up my reserves? Do I need to spend my reserves? What do I need to do? So, and the more you actually treat it like a plan rather than an obligation. Some of us, I've done this before. I've created a budget just because I was told I had to. But I also have used budgets more often, at least, especially personally, as a plan. This is what I'm going to use to guide the way I use my money and to tell my money where I want it to go. So when we're thinking about that, we're not going to go into too great a detail here, but one of the things you could do is, again, start with the end in mind. So even apart from finances, as a church, what do you want to accomplish? What do you want at the end of the year? What would make you feel good? And it might be, maybe it was we put more money in our capital reserve. It might be we finally fixed up the kids ministry and we knew we would spend an extra amount of money. It might be that we, I don't know what it is exactly, but think about that start with the end in mind. Think about how you'd want to feel at the end if this budget was actually spent the way you wanted it to spend. The next one is estimate revenue. So the biggest mistake I've ever made is starting with the expenses. A lot of times, we used to work, I used to not work, but I used to be on the finance committee for a Christian school, and they would always do the expenses, and then they would do a plug figure at the end is this is how much we need if this is going to work. Well, you don't start with the expenses, you start with the revenue. I probably do have a revenue estimator spreadsheet. I probably have a couple of them somewhere, but anyway, I would always look at that. If you could see from the trend, if you look from year to year, are we slowly going up? Are we slowly going down? Are we maintaining? Neither one of those is incorrect, but it was just an idea of if you want to have it as accurate of an estimate as you could possibly have, because again, we're going to want to live with this. If you start here and it's inaccurate, so for example, I had a church that they always budgeted 120,000, and I tried to convince them, budget 100,000 in revenue and just show that you're going to be borrowing 20,000 from your reserves. And they would not do that because whatever, they just would not do that because it was a mind trick for them. But just start with being honest. What is our revenue going to actually be? And then the other thing to do when you're working with your expenses, it's tempting sometimes for just the people with the financial minds to do the work and just to plug in the figures. But I found it to be most beneficial if I want the other people in that are actually going to be helping spend the money. If they're part of the budget, then they might live by the budget. So if they help create the budget, then they'll support the budget. So that is key. If they don't create it, they're not going to support it, and they'll just keep spending however they want to spend. So I've normally sent worksheets, or maybe I've given them an amount. I'm sometimes I might have given them an amount ahead of time and said, you have 10,000 to spend it for your committee. Unless you have some major thing, you can put together a proposal if you have need a major increase or something like that. But otherwise, you have 10,000. How do you want it split up?
Jeff,
So yeah.
we've had someone in the chat who is one of the pastors of one of our church plants says it's difficult to estimate revenue and expenses for a church plant. Would you have any advice on that?
And yeah, no, well, do I have any advice on that? You're gonna have to revisit. So in that case, and anybody that's going through major change, you're gonna have to revisit that budget like sometimes monthly, but at least quarterly. I mean, so what we did in the Global Methodist Church, the denomination, same kind of problem. We started off in August. Our first year, our first month, we had I think $1,200 in connectional funding given, and then the next month it was like 8,000. So and this was before my time. So, but Keith Boyette would look at it and revise the budget every quarter based on the most accurate information. And that's what I would encourage. I would kind of ignore an annual budget, and I would just go, let's look month by month, and maybe do a quarterly budget. And you'll get better and better as things go, as you get more and more information. And by the way, this also applies to any church. Um, any church, I wouldn't just say set it and forget it with my church. So for example, in the Dakotas, 2 years ago, we didn't have any snow, and snow removal is a huge part of our budget. So for them, I remember one church was stressing out about doing, I think it was sidewalk repair. And I said, well, how much does it cost? And they said $8,000. Well, their snow removal budget was normally $12,000. So they said, well, yeah, we can afford it because they revisited their budget. But they had to train themselves to think that, although this wasn't in their budget, you revisit it, and I'd like to revisit it quarterly. Um, what I've done with my board of pensions that I talked about, what I've done with that Christian school, and what I've done with some other organizations is quarterly. I'll just go through and I'll make projections, and I'll say this is where it looks like we're ending for the year for revenue, if we're on target or not. And this is where we're looking for expenses. And that way my leadership knows, because what they want to know, your leadership wants to know two things. They want to know, how are we doing? How much money can I spend? How are we doing? How much money can we spend? And being able to do some kind of a projection ahead of time just provides that valuable, otherwise they're held in kind of a fear of, I don't want to spend anything, but when maybe they can't, or maybe they should be scared, and maybe they shouldn't be able to spend. So
That's helpful. Thank you.
yeah. And then the last one is, don't be afraid to prioritize. I mean, unless your church just doesn't know what to do with all their money, which is very few churches, you're gonna have to make some hard decisions, and you're gonna have to help the leadership understand, because there'll probably be more people asking for money on where to spend it in the budget than maybe you have for estimated revenue, and you just have to make decisions. And if you're gonna dip into reserves, so like I said, that one church that normally had to dip into reserves to cover their budget, um, it better be a good investment. I mean, that's what you're doing when you're spending the Lord's money in the work of the church. It is an investment. So hopefully it's an investment that's worthwhile. So prioritize. Don't be afraid to end things. We're all, I mean, we're pretty much used to this. If you're Global Methodist, I mean, the oldest church in the Global Methodist denomination is what, 20 some months old. So I mean, it's not like we have a long history of being Global Methodist, so we're used to change. So, but don't be afraid to prioritize and say these are the most important things. And if it doesn't hit that priority list, drop it. that was one of my biggest regrets. When I worked in the United Methodist is that we would never drop anything off the conference budget. I remember one year we had a program auditor in, and we all actually voted off this one ministry. We all said that this doesn't help. Well, that was 10 years ago and it's still in the budget. I mean, everybody agreed that it wasn't worth it, but nobody wanted to offend it because, especially, we would think, well, we're going to offend some imaginary people somewhere. So, um, you're you're a steward. You're trying to manage the money in a way, as if you think about a steward, imagine that you're Jesus Christ is the owner. You want to manage it in such a way that'll make Jesus Christ happy. And will he be happy if you are supporting ministry that's not producing any fruit? Well, we know that he would. I mean, he gives us very explicit parables about that. If you don't get a return on your investment, he's not happy with that. If you're planting seed and you're not getting any kind of return on that, any kind of harvest on that, he's not necessarily happy with that if you don't even try to get a harvest. So, all right, that is going to bring us to the end. And I'm going to say we have more times that if there aren't questions that I didn't talk about, but one of the places that you can go to, this is not Global Methodist necessarily, 100% Global Methodist, but I have a blog. I put out a weekly post and a weekly video. And so most of the stuff that I presented here, I've also posted on my blog before. And it's just, mainly it's an outlet for me. So, but it's also been helpful for a lot of people because you never know. I mean, I have churches that call up. I had a church call up about chart of accounts. Can I get a chart of accounts? Well, guess what? I got a video for that. I don't have to recreate anything. I just have to give you a link, but it's all out there. And most of these forums that I showed you to, they're out there as well. I don't remember if I showed you. I'll show it real quickly just before I switch. But I do have like financial policy manuals. I have facility policy manuals that'll at least give you a head start. So if your church doesn't have a policy manual, this is a good place to start. That way it gives you a base, because sometimes that's the most intimidating part of any kinds of this writing is it's just starting. And this will give you a draft, and I don't have any pride in ownership, and I stole most of these from other churches anyway. So you can use it and then adapt it as you wish. So if that's one of your concerns. All right. We're open to any question that you might have. Global Methodist, church related, anything like that. It's tax related.
Questions, friends, that you might have for Jeff? There's a raise hand function if you want to, we can kind of call on folks that way. One person in the chat, Deborah, said she appreciated the workshop, so thank you for that. Y'all are the easiest bunch ever of any finance presentation I've ever seen. If you don't have any questions, I'm impressed. I think you're that good, Jeff.
So, well, I do appreciate being with you. And yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Jay, to be with your churches.
I'm going to add just one quick thing because we do get questions from time to time on connectional funding. So just to make sure everyone's clear, and Florida's going to put out a new video and e-blast on this in maybe a week or so at the most. But the total connectional funding for your church is 2.5%. 1% goes to the general church, and 1.5% goes to the Florida Conference.
Yep.
And that is of your operational income, and operational income is defined. So you can go to paragraph, I think it's 349. Am I remembering correctly, Jeff?
Jay, would you mind if I share my screen again? I think I have one that'll help too.
Yep.
Let me.
And so some people mistakenly believe it's last month's operational income. It's not, it's the previous year. We do that so you can have something to budget for the whole year. So we've had 2023 finish. So you'll figure out what your operational income was for 2023 and 2.5%, 1% going to the general church, 1.5% going to the Florida Conference, and then you remit that monthly. Some churches like to give it quarterly, or we have a couple that like to give it annually. That's fine too. But we have a form for that. If you go to our website, floridagmc.org, you'll see on the menu that there is a tab that says Forms and Policies, and you'll see our connectional funding form on the Forms and Policies page. And it's a Word document. When you click it, you can print it, and it will pop right out. And then Jeff's showing it to you there. It has, just like Jeff's, it has the address that you mail the check to and all that kind of fun stuff. So I'll hush and let Jeff talk.
Yep, and then there's a place to give online as well. And then here's what Jay was talking about is we did try to summarize what was in the Book of Doctrines of Discipline, and especially those main questions. So the Dakotas UMC, we had this kind of formula already, but so you would just punch it in the calculator, and there's a number of different calculators. So whatever it is, and it'll calculate it out to the monthly amount for you. And I don't want to speak for Florida, but at least for the general church, we're okay if a church wants to save a stamp and send in 3 months worth, whether at the beginning or the end of the quarter, or some churches even pay it annually, the annual amount, or for 6 months. So whatever that is, we're not sticklers on that or anything.
We're glad to receive it quarterly or semi-annually or annually. That's fine. So we do have you can give electronically through the Florida GMC as well. But the only reason we would probably prefer a check is because we lose about 3% of what you pay us through credit card fees, unless you choose to pay the credit card fees. So we don't mind receiving the checks in the slightest. That's not a problem.
And the general church, we are updating ours. We're moving to Realm, which will make it easier for churches to make an ACH, to pay by ACH, and that brings down the fees. And then you could also schedule it. Again, you think about being able to make payments easier. It'd be nice to just be able to calculate, and I wish we were ahead of things on this. It's coming out in March, but it would be nice to just set your amount, calculate your amount, put it in for the year, and say, I want to do 12 months. And that's what we'll end up doing. It's just churches can just set it and forget it until next year.
Bill Langley's asking, who does the GMC send email to other than pastors? I am head of finance and I've not received any notifications. Just don't want to miss out on an action item or due date. So for the Florida GMC, friends, it's part of those growing pains. We have literally just this past week, my GMC, which is our denominational database, has rolled out to every annual conference. So we are in the process of actually still making sure the churches are actually in the right annual conference, that the pastor is assigned to the right church. And then, in the coming weeks and months, we'll be asking you for information about, who's your finance chair, who's your staff pairs chair, those sorts of things. Now, that said, there are 2 lists that I want to encourage you to go to. If you go to floridagmc.org, scroll to the bottom, you'll see a place where you can get our conference e-blasts. And if you just submit there, it'll go straight to our e-blast. The denomination has one as well. And we encourage you to go to globalmethodist.org, and you can sign up to get the denominational e-blasts as well. And I encourage you to do that.
And I echo what Jay said, growing pains. We are working on we normally send out, at least related to the benefits, to every pastor that's on benefits and everybody that's receiving a benefit billing. So that's a mostly monthly newsletter, but I look forward to the day when we have a list of church treasurers and we're able to work with the conferences and and decide on what needs to go out from us and what needs to go out from conferences, and it'll be cool. There was talk about future workshops or anything like that, and for my own part, I'm open to doing it every now and then, especially if there were specific topics, Jay. But of course, it doesn't have to be me. But whatever you decide.
Well, this is recorded and we will post it so folks can see it again. Jeff, one person asked, with setting up policies and procedures, can we contact you directly? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm able to. Yep, you can contact me directly. I put my email in the chat. Yeah, I did put my email in the chat, that jpospisil@globalmethodist.org. And that's probably a good way to reach me. So
Very good. And then let's see. Jan is asking, I'm confused. If we disaffiliated in September, do we still base our connectional funding on 2023 year end or for the year ending August 2024? No, it's your calendar year, Jan. So January 1st through December 31st, January of 2023, whatever your operational income is, and then you'll take 2.5%, 1% to the general church, 1.5% to the Florida Conference.
So the one weird one is, and I hope I'm not going to give a conflicting answer with Jay, but if you're a brand new church, that means you didn't have a history.
Yeah, if you're a church.
So let's just say you started January of this year, you would have 0 for the first year then of connectional funding, and then next year you start. And I don't think that's a bad deal, because there's a lot of challenges with a new church. And but I have a church that they started in June, so their first year is starting now, and it's going to be based on 6 months worth or 7 months worth of activity. So again, not bad. They're going to be phasing themselves in, because at least for my own part, versus that 1% for me and 1.5% for Florida, I'd rather see a strong church. And if that's a little bit of help, hopefully it is. So
yeah, that's a good word. Anything else, friends? All right. Well, Jeff, thank you. We are deeply grateful for you sharing some of your time tonight with us. And like I said, friends, we will get this posted. It'll probably first be posted on our conference Facebook page. And we're actually in the process of getting a YouTube page up as well. So as soon as we get that up, we will post it there as well. We are also in the process of we will do a similar one of these for staff parish human resources issues. We'll do one also for trustees issues and one for church councils as well. So that way we'll have a kind of a library, an online library, if you will, for those teams so that they can get training on demand whenever they want to see it. So for example, if you were here tonight, but your finance team wasn't, and you want to show it to them, you might schedule a time at your next finance team where you watch all or a piece of it, and then maybe you watch another piece of it at the next meeting or something like that. So it'll be there for you on demand. All right. Well, Jeff, thank you.
all right.
Let me pray for us and we'll close out. Gracious God, we thank you so much for this time together. Lord, I thank you for Jeff. I thank you for the blessing that he is to our denomination, and for his really his desire, Lord, to see global Methodism thrive in the next coming years, so that we can live out our mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ who worship passionately and love extravagantly and witness boldly. Lord, we pray for our churches. We pray that you would guide them to be good stewards of the resources that you have entrusted to them. Bless them, Lord, with good decision making, and Lord, bless them with putting those resources to use to make disciples for you. Help us to have a good rest of the evening, we pray. And we ask all of this in the name of your Son and our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. God bless you, friends. Good night.